Hello, we are for this presentation going to focus on two important components related to lifespan development. There are many different ways to think about how people develop, but for the purposes of this chapter and what's highlighted, we're going to specifically think about Piaget's theory of cognitive development and Kohlberg's theory of moral development. So, Piaget is one theorist who developed a way of conceptualizing the cognitive process from birth through the last stage that develops during adolescence. There are other theorists who would suggest that cognitive development has additional stages beyond what we see in adolescence in the formal operational stage, but for the purposes of this chapter and what we're trying to learn about as far as broad concepts in the field of psychology, we're going to focus on Piaget's four stages of cognitive development. So first we have the sensory motor stage. Think about any baby that you've ever seen. They are putting things in their mouth, they are touching things, they are banging on things, they are learning about their environment in a very kinesthetic way. We talked about different ways of understanding intelligence, and we talked about kinesthetic intelligence. Well, babies are all about this kinesthetic experience in terms of movement and having sensory opportunities to understand their world. By ages 5 months to 8 months, babies develop a sense of object permanence. In the beginning of their life, those first 5 or so months, there's this sense of when something's moved, it's gone, right? It's like, oh no, it's gone. You took my bottle away and it's gone forever. Or you moved that ball behind your back and now I don't have it anymore. That's the early stage from birth to about 4 to 5 months. Around 4 to 5 months, or between actually 5 months and 8 months, it's likely that the babies are going to develop a sense of, oh, wait, even though I can't see it, it's still there. So my ball still does exist, and my parents are still here, and that kind of a thing, right? So this is something that happens during the sensory motor stage. What also exists during this stage is this fear, this lack of certainty in terms of other people, and we call that stranger anxiety. When someone enters the room, it's an uncertainness and there's a fear until they understand more about their environment, who they can trust, etc. So that is a healthy thing that we hope they maintain to some degree as life progresses, and we see it really coming into the space at this age. Around ages 2 to 6, when we're thinking about toddlers who are becoming elementary school students, they begin to use words and images to represent things, but they are not engaging in logical reasoning. So trying to explain to a toddler why it's bad that they bit somebody, right? They can understand that they shouldn't do it, but they might not be totally grasping why that's a problem. It is good to help them understand they shouldn't do it. We're going to stick with that. But it's important to understand they might not know all of the implications, so an extensive conversation might not be helpful. So at this age, they are learning about their space and their world by engaging in pretend play, using their imagination, and really trying to make sense of the symbols and how their space can be manipulated, and pretend play really helps with that. In this stage, they also are learning a lot more in terms of language and the role of their words. And they're also thinking from an egocentric perspective, which is where they are thinking that other people are experiencing the world as they are. And that's not the case. So, of course, you should understand that I don't want to eat vegetables. Or, of course, you should understand that I'm super excited about seeing the next Disney movie, right? And they approach you with this excitement, like, oh, I'm so excited. As though you should also be so excited, even though that might not be the case. That's okay. That's something that they go through. And this sense of egocentrism also reappears later when young people are adolescent. We're going to talk about pre-operational cognitive processes, concrete operational cognitive processes, and formal operational cognitive processes. It's helpful probably for you to realize that when we talk about operational, this has to do with logical manipulation of information, so children kind of understand things in a more concrete way. When we're talking about young people ages 2 to 6, especially in the earlier part of that window, they don't understand things in a logical way. So that's why this is considered the pre-operational stage of development. Now, when we get to concrete operational stages of the concrete operational stage of development, there is much more of an understanding of how numbers are used, of how space is used. There's an understanding of conservation, where even if something changes in its appearance, it's the equal size and amount. There's even an understanding of reversibility, where objects can change. For example, if you have an ice cube that's a cube and it melts and it becomes a liquid and it becomes flat, it can now change back to being an ice cube under the right circumstances. So there's a lot of awareness of how the world is manipulated in a more concrete way. There's more reasoning with young people that can occur here, though the degree to which it's effective may depend on the circumstance. So, formal operational stage. Here we're able to use abstract reasoning. So we've built on the previous stages, sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational stage, and now we're at the sensory motor stage, which is Piaget's final stage of development. And so in this stage, young people are able to use abstract logic and think about things in a hypothetical sense. So what if this? What are the consequences of this? If then that statements can be more effectively introduced here, and we can hold them accountable for these statements in a stronger way here. Poetry might happen here, right? You understand the use of words and relating words to images and thinking about other ways to communicate. And as I stated earlier, egocentrism is going to reappear here, where it's all about the teenager and what their experience is, and what's going on with other people may be secondary. So just think about these things and the children that you know. Do they reach any of these milestones early? Think about their language development, what kind of questions they ask. Theorists have suggested that Piaget might be underestimating children at different stages. So this can kind of be a conservative estimate. You may see children in your life who are doing later stages earlier than what Piaget would suggest. This is just an example of imagination at work. And so this is something that can be really helpful to children in them understanding their environment, understanding their role, understanding how they can use their words. These children are about 2 to 3 years old playing, as you may guess, doctor. And the teacher is the patient and they're taking care of her. Here is the image of children using creativity and making sense of shapes and what shapes can be. So in this case, clearly somebody looks like they're getting mailed off, but somebody might also be considering this a bed, right? And so this is something that has the same kind of structural components of a bed in terms of the height and the length, the rectangular shape, and now they're using it for other things. So what other ways can they use this similar type of shape? So that's cognitive development. Let's talk about moral development a little bit. There are 3 levels to Kohlberg's moral development stage, and keep in mind that each level has 2 stages. So it's his model, and each level of the model has 2 different stages. Okay, so there is a hypothetical situation that's presented oftentimes when we're talking about Kohlberg's dilemma, right? And it's this situation that I'm going to present to you here. Read this story or this situation. So, it's a predicament, a classic story called the Heinz Dilemma. And it's a story about whether a man should steal medicine to save his wife's life, right? We might compare this to a modern John Q, if you've ever seen this movie, situation where he was thinking about how to save his son's life, who had a heart condition. But let's get back to the Heinz Dilemma. All right, so Lawrence Kohlberg was interested not so much in whether you would say yes or no to this question, in terms of yes, I'd steal the medicine, or no, I wouldn't. He really wanted to use this scenario to start to help us conceptualize moral reasoning, okay? It's not really an issue of, for us as scholars and as learners, it's not an issue of yay or nay, will you steal the medicine, but how do you go about making that actual decision is an important question. So, medicine, wife dying, what do you do? So at the pre-conventional level, the stage 1 is focused on obedience and punishment. So behavior is driven by avoiding punishments. And so you can see these stages in your text. The question is, how would you respond? Are the questions that you ask yourself to help you make that decision about the medicine, what stage of development might you be using to answer that question? So if you're focused on what will happen to me, you might be at stage 1, where you're focused on behavior is driven by avoiding punishment. So I'm not trying to go to jail. Stage 2 is focused on your individual interest in what you want, right? I do not want my wife to die. I may do whatever I need to do. In stage 3, you likely are at a more mature level of development than at stage 1. At stage 3, you're sensitive to social implications. What would people think of me? At stage 4, you're aware of authority, and the behavior is driven by obeying authority and conforming to this social order. And so, are you willing to break the law to do this? How bad do you want it? And then as your reasoning develops, you become more autonomous in terms of thinking about what's necessary for you and for your family. So at stage 5, the behavior is driven by a balance between the social order of things and your individual rights. And so the question might be, do we have the right to have quality health care at an affordable price, right? And then at stage 6, the question might be, don't I know what's right for my family? Behavior may be driven by an internal sense of morality. So this is what is externally said in terms of stage 3 and stage 4, but fundamentally, I am able to reason and make decisions that are consistent with our values and the way that we want to live our life, even if there are consequences. You take that risk. So an interesting part about Kohlberg's theory is that it might not be equivalent in terms of how it represents men and women. Apparently, Kohlberg felt that men were more likely to progress to stages 5 and 6 than women were, and he apparently saw women as being more limited, more impaired, less advanced in their reasoning abilities. And that was an issue for Carol Gilligan, right? She said, well, actually, it's not that we're limited. It's just that your theory is limited. It's limited to a white male perspective that doesn't represent gender, meaning other perspectives in terms of women, and probably culture as well. So she thought that Kohlberg's theory was focused on the masculine voice of logical and individualistic perspectives, just what you need and just what you want. And she really felt like there needed to be more of an understanding of an interpersonal sensitivity. So she felt like Kohlberg's theory focused on meaning that emphasized moral decisions in the sense of protecting the rights of people and making sure justice is upheld, which is a good thing. But there's another way to think about it. There's another element that we can add, and that was often added from a female perspective. Okay, and so that perspective would be based on relationships. And so from this perspective, the theory or understanding moral reasoning beyond Kohlberg would suggest that meaning is focused on staying connected and maintaining interpersonal relationships. So that is central to the moral reasoning, not simply protecting the rights of people and making sure justice is upheld. Two different focal points in how people would answer that question about the Heinz dilemma. These are things to consider. I will tell you that the Kohlberg model, is kind of nuanced. So meaning that it can be hard to tell exactly in a really concrete way, oh, this person's operating from stage 1 as compared to stage 2. I would more so focus on you understanding that Kohlberg did focus on moral reasoning, and he did organize moral reasoning according to these different categories. So there's different ways in which people will make decisions. That is the end of this presentation. I hope that it was informative to you, and if you have questions, of course, let me know, and continue to embrace the content in Chapter 9.